One of the most commonly asked questions I get from people who are curious about expanded consciousness and whatnot is, how do I kill my ego? Like, how can I just suffer that ego death or experience that ego death? Everybody who is starting to have a higher awareness of themselves, starting to recognize that if their three-dimensional constructs and concepts of who they think they are, if they keep attaching to those, they're recognizing that, well, you're never going to be able to find your truest self if you're not able to detach from your ideas of who you think you are. Because the truth is, you really don't know who you are, or especially not who you were in the past lives that you certainly have lived. So I thought I'd make this video. Alright, so I got a few different ways that I can explain this to you. It is a big deal though that you recognize that everything works differently for everybody. So it's not like there's one way to make sure that you kill your ego. But the biggest thing I want to acknowledge, and the first thing, is a lot of people keep suggesting that they do drugs, some kind of psychedelics, in order to have that ego death. Now, I can't say that I'm against this idea, but personally, I experienced this ego death before I even tried any psychedelics. So I'm very well aware that you don't need anything external in order to experience this. So if you have just enough time invested in yourself and you start to look within enough, all the answers are inside of you. So don't ever think that you would have to use something external in order to create something or become someone who you wish to be. You would never need to ingest anything in order to become that, because that wouldn't even make sense, that you're a god, but a god needs assistance from something outside of themselves. That doesn't make any sense. If you're a god, you got total control. Or at least you can have total control. You have the ability to be whoever you want to be. All you got to do is choose that. But because of the 3D distractions, sometimes people will think, oh, well, I need to eat mushrooms and then I'll experience the ego death. Or I need to smoke DMT and then I'll be able to take better care of myself. And that's not how it is. That's somebody revealing their low levels of maturity as far as their spiritual growth. Now, if you really want to be able to have this ego death as easy as possible, you got to learn how to properly love yourself. That's the easiest way to really sum up the whole thing. Now, when you know better, you do better. So if you know that you got a bad habit or tendencies to do something, whether it be a person, place, or a thing, whether you stuck on these toxic people or whether you're just not secure within yourself, if you let somebody else or some other people, say, like, everybody's surrounded by people at some point in their life, they're around people who try to influence them to do things that they know they ain't got no business doing. So if you're not strong enough to stand your own ground, that is a clear sign right there that you don't even have an awareness of your own self-worth. So that is something that would happen to somebody who's still suffering from their ego being alive and controlling them. So what you really need to be okay with is being alone, being okay with standing out. When there's people who are trying to influence you to do certain things, you got to be okay with letting them down and making them feel like, oh man, you're not fun, or whatever they might say. Don't let it bother you at all, because the only way that you would even be bothered or concerned with what these people are saying is if your ego is thinking for you. But if you're not thinking through the ego and you just have a higher self-awareness of your value, you would say, well, I don't really feel the need to satisfy or please these other people, because personally I am happy with my decisions. And that's when you know somebody is spiritually mature. If somebody else is always trying to get validation from others, it's clearly showing that they're not very mature. Now, that's a pretty common thing, and that's why social media can be such a bad thing too, because social media make people insecure because they're always comparing themselves to others. That's fueling the ego. That's making the ego bigger than it could possibly be, or bigger than it would otherwise be. So anyways, that's another subject for another time. But you got to make sure you acknowledge all of your biggest character flaws. That's a really big one. So once you recognize what can hold you back from greatness, and you know how to spend alone time the proper ways, and you're spending that time looking within instead of trying to find something outside of you, then you're on your way. Now, of course, a lot of people, once they experience astral projection, they recognize that ego death. Boom, it drops immediately, because there's no way your ego can exist in these higher realms. So if you have access, well, we all have access, once you find how to access these higher dimensions, your ego is actually going to die, at least in some ways. But the thing is, some people can say they had an ego death, but just because your ego died don't mean it died and it's never coming back, because everything can always come back to life in another form. So some people, I have a few friends, quite a few friends, who have taken DMT, but they didn't take very much of it. So they experienced that ego death to some degree because they did it, and of course they experienced some stuff and it expanded their awareness. Also with LSD too, they told me a lot about this. But if they didn't do very much of it, or they weren't spiritually mature enough yet to really be able to handle being able to face themselves and their biggest weaknesses, then of course they weren't able to experience the full ego death where it never comes back. That ego death where you really don't care to please anybody outside of yourself, and you naturally see the oneness within everything. So you're going to naturally want to accept everybody else for who they are. Now, of course, your standards are going to always be high from then on. Your standards for yourself and what you choose to involve yourself in are going to be higher than they ever have been once you have experienced the ego death, especially the one that actually lasts. But the way that I see it, you would have to continually go to the astral realm consciously, be able to bring your consciousness to the astral realms in order to be able to make sure that that ego stays dead, because there's so many things in this matrix you can get addicted to or distracted by. So you got to make sure that you're tuning in to the higher realms and staying on a really high vibration. Now, I got one big thing to mention. You really got to be real with yourself and recognize that if your third eye isn't even open yet, you got to be real with yourself and recognize you probably don't know very much anyways. Now, even once your third eye is open, there's still so much stuff in the universe you don't have a clue about, because, well, we're down here in our lowest form. But if you know, or at least if you're not even sure what it means to have your third eye to be opened, you got to be real with yourself enough to be like, look, I probably don't know what I'm talking about. I probably am not very aware of a lot about what I think I know. If you are one of those people where you're convinced of what you think you know, and you're not willing to at least receive what other people have to say or what somebody else's experience might have been, if you're one of those closed-minded people, you're not going to be able to kill that ego. It's too big. Now, of course, everybody is able to, but you're going to have to control yourself. It's a conscious decision to expand and grow and be able to get that ego to get out of your way. So in order for you to get that ego out of the way, you're going to have to be more open-minded. You're going to have to be more receptive. It's a feminine energy. You're going to have to become more feminine when you're surrounded by wisdom or new experiences, aka wisdom. You gain wisdom off of experience or from somebody else's experiences. So either way it goes, you're going to have to gain more experience in order for you to get this ego to drop off, so you can really find who you truly are once again. And of course, like I mentioned before, real quick, social media is going to keep fueling your ego. So if you really are serious and you want to be able to make the biggest achievements as quick as possible, quit it. Quit it. I'm not saying you have to never get back on again, but you have to let go of it, especially if you're addicted to it, attached to it. Because let's be real, everybody is starting to be aware that these devices that are constantly in our faces with these screens, they're highly addictive. There's lots of research showing this and proving this. Social media addiction is a very real thing, and it's starting to become categorized just like any other psychological disorder. So if you really want to be able to get that ego to drop off as easily as possible, you'll let go of your attachments to this world, whether it be the specific kinds of food or food in general, because fasting can give you a lot of superpowers. It'll get you to access all kind of abilities you didn't know you had. You got to make sure you letting go of all of these three-dimensional concepts of who you think you are. So if you're known as the guy to wear the greatest sneakers, maybe keep those sneakers in the closet for a couple weeks and just wear a few pairs that aren't so flashy. It doesn't have to be that you just completely go and you become a monk and you shave your head and don't affiliate with society or anything like that. It doesn't have to be that extreme. But what you have to do is you have to be able to recognize what it is that you are attached to and be willing to let it go. And that is when you're on your way to mastering your mind. This has been a 10-minute or so video, and this is all I had to say. And the next video is going to be about how to know if your love is truly a lasting love or if it's just infatuation.